Okay, let's start over. Welcome to my talk. I'm Tom Rothamo. I go by Renpytom in most places, and I'm the lead developer of Renpy. And while we've had so many useful talks today that talk about building things you can use to build your visual novel, I'm going a totally different direction for this one because I realized when I was writing this that Renpy is almost exactly 20 years old today. And so what I thought I would do is take it back in time a bit because many of you haven't been there for, say, the first 10 years of Renpy development. So I thought I'd go dig through some of my old posts, my logs, and just talk about those first 10 years and just some of the changes that and things that were added from the start in those early days of Renpy. But before that, I do want to make a couple of announcements for some important changes that are happening in May 2024. Mostly because we have a bunch of developers here, and I just want to make sure that you can know this and bring this, and for content creators, you can bring this really know. The first is that sometime after May, Renpy 7 is going to be end of life. That's largely because Python 2 has been unsupported since 2020, and it's getting very, very hard to keep developing in it. So sometime after May, I'll stop making new releases of the Renpy 7 series. And because Renpy 7 is the only one that still supports 32-bit Windows, we're going to drop support for 32-bit Windows at the time. The original OpenGL renderer is going to be removed at that same time. Already in the next release coming up, 8.2, we're going to start ignoring the config.gl2 variables to be able to force people to go onto the old renderer. But pretty soon it's going to be removed entirely. And that's mostly because it's been my experience that generally going to the old renderer simply causes more bugs than it fixes at this point. I spent several days tracking down issues that had been fixed in the renderer, but not the old one. So it's just coming out just to simplify the engine. And finally, we're ending support for Windows 7, 8, and 8.1. Again, that's mostly because no web browser supports those platforms. Microsoft stopped supporting it a few years ago. And also Python is going to stop supporting it. So in order to be able to upgrade, um, we're going to start requiring Windows 10 or higher for that. So now, anyway, let's go back in time a bit to the main part of this talk. To 2004, this picture was taken on, I believe, January 30th of 2004. And this is the very, very first version of Renpy, which was never actually released. This was actually a very early version that I started, but didn't quite complete, mostly because it had some issues where essentially the design was wrong and it could never load and save. A few days later, there was actually version 2, and about a month later, there was version 3. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to get those to run, but they would almost certainly look very similar because I was using the same game and the same data. But I thought I'd just start with us and just show everybody this very early version. Later in that year, about August, I came back to Renpy, and so this is the preview release 1 of Renpy 4, and Renpy 4 eventually turned into the Renpy I know today. And this has the very first version of Eileen that people would have seen in conjunction with Renpy, and a quite familiar picture in the back. It includes the same White House picture. I actually went back to my files where I took it, but it's the same picture that's still in the tutorial today. So that's almost certainly why I never took it out. One interesting thing about this very early version of Renpy is it actually had some of the features that we had today. It had menus, it had text input. It actually had rollback because I'm very terrible at clicking on games. It didn't have a load and save, but those were added very early. And so at the end of 2004, and this is wrong. Sorry, the 10 releases of Renpy, 0 games came out in 2004. But by the end of 2004, we were ready to have the first games coming out. 2005 was the first year where there was actually a Renpy game released, and that was Moonlight Walks, which you can see a picture of here. This is the original version with the programmer art, or at least my art for it, when I was pretending I could be an artist. And it also shows the very early menu, which tended to be contained within the text box. 2005 also marked the first NaNoRenO, which is our event to create a visual novel in a month, which actually makes it one of the world's longest continuously running game jams. Some of the features of Renpy that came out in 2005 that are still in use today are NVL mode came out that year, voice support, text tags, and the lint or check script feature all were introductions in 2005. In 2006, we had the introduction of the very first Ren'Py launcher, which was a big deal when it came to getting people ready to being able to create their games much more easily. That actually included an editor, in this case, an old one called Site, as well as it included the ability to package your game up. So before that, in order to make a game, people had to move files around, zip files up, things like that. Now with the launcher, it was able to manage your project for you and do that. 2006 also is when the current Ren'Py logo and the current Eileen sprite were drawn by an artist known as Peroski, who was in the community for a while. And it's also the year the very first version of the question game came out. Moving to 2007, 2008. These are interesting years because these are the very early years when we were experimenting a lot in very old ways to customize the GUI. One thing you'll notice about these is that they tend to all have very, very similar preferences menus, save menus, things like that. While there starts to be a little more customization of the in-game interface, which you see in the right with the game that came out that year called Starlight Episode 0. That's because there was a system called Themes in which we had lots of different looks for buttons. It would let you customize the colors of the buttons. And then a second system called Layouts that used Python function, would define a set of Python functions that would actually build the interface up for you. So while you could start customizing your game, it was quite difficult. And so, we had 35 and 36 games in those two years as Ren'Py started getting a little bigger. 2009 was very interesting. We had several of our first Otome/Amari games came out this year, and we also had the second version of the launcher here. And this is actually, I believe this is a 2010 game called Realistair that shows some of some of the improvements to use of image maps for interface. The other thing that came out in 2009 is that was the first time we had transforms and ATL introduced by. It's also where those audio and video features that were spoken about earlier came in. Before 2009, you could only play one music track and one voice track at a time. After 2009, we got the ability to play as many channels as we possibly could at the time, as you needed at the time. Moving up to 2010, 2010 introduces screen language, the original version of screen language. The current version that we use is version 2, but that's mostly for speed ups. The original version was where you started to be able to do the interface like this. Being able to do that started allowing much more complicated interfaces. This is a game called Magical Diary Horse Hall, and while I don't actually know if it used screen language or is just like a really strong use of the UI functions, it certainly did give you. It certainly shows you what became possible in this time. Other nice feature that came out in 2010 is the original OpenGL renderer, the one that's finally leaving this year. But that's the first time when you could actually resize a Ren'Py game. Before 2010, your games would simply be whatever resolution they were created at. And if it was too bigger than the user's screen, well, then they couldn't actually play your game. So finally, by adding that OpenGL renderer, we really, one, improved the performance of that, and two, managed to actually let it fit a whole bunch more devices. Welcome to 2011. 2011 was the year Ren'Py moved off of the desktop. This is the oldest shot I could find of Ren'Py running on a smartphone, in this case, my Android phone, running the second version of the question. There were several different variations of the question. There was first an upgrade in the sprites, and then the script was rewritten about halfway through. So this gives you that. As you can see, we had 2 releases that year, 126 games. 2011 is also the year when the quick menu was added, and the quick menu is actually one of the things that I look for to try and guess is something a Ren'Py game or not. But that wasn't actually around for any of these early games. That was added in 2011. And then 2012 was the year we had some of the biggest game releases. I'll pick 2 of these out here. Kitawa Shoujo was obviously huge, and the mass release that created a huge community, and basically so many people were inspired by that. I also put an Analog Hate Story here, which was the first release that made it onto Steam. And given that we have over 2,000, I think over 2,100 games on Steam at this point. Being the first one to go on Steam was a fairly big deal. Analog is also a pretty good use, showing how customized, thanks to screens, user interfaces can be. And the other thing that came out in 2012 is the launcher. That's when the third version launcher, which is basically the same look that you see today, which is based on screen language and so on, that actually came out in 2012. So that brings us to 2013. 2013 didn't have any huge visual improvements. What it did have was the translation framework. Before that, if you wanted to translate your game, you basically just created a second game that just had a second script in it in the different language. Whereas the translation framework lets you substitute in one or more or zero lines of dialogue for the current one. That was an innovation in the 2013 timeframe. Another thing 2013 gave us is auto voicing. Before 2013, if you wanted voice in your game, you had to put a voice statement before every line of dialogue. And now, after 2013, now Ren'Py can automatically define those for you. 2013 also marks a really tipping point in the rate of change of Ren'Py, because that's when I started working on it every day. So I think 2013 is a good place to leave this section of the talk off and just take a look at those first 10 years, and you see how there was a slow but steady building up to a whopping 175 games per year. And now I think I'll skip forward a decade and bring us up to date to 2023, where we had, let me just read the number, 2,482 games released last year. Those are numbers that are off of VNDB, and that includes the initial release of any particular game, but doesn't include demos, doesn't include translations, doesn't include additional updates to Patreon games and things like that. So that number is a bit bigger. In fact, I can barely see the bar for 2005 on this chart. So yeah. Let's talk a little bit. I also want to talk a little bit about the health of the project in 2023 while we're here. We had one release, Ren'Py 8.1, with a few fixed releases that came out with it. But Ren'Py 8.1 was a big one because it means Ren'Py 8 and Python 3 now run anywhere. That was a release that, as I announced on the last project, that brought Ren'Py 8 onto the web platform, which is the last platform it didn't run on. Ren'Py Sync, which was introduced at the last visual conference, that's been used 13,000 times by players to upload games and synchronize them between different devices. We have a large number of people contributing to Ren'Py. We have 40 people who have at least one commit into Git. That doesn't include everybody that contributes, because somebody who simply tests and finds an issue and finds an issue and lets me fix it is a very valuable contribution. But just counting developers, and just in the main Git repository and not the second one that's used for the build process, we have 40 developers. 8 of those developers have 10 commits. One of them, Mal, had 45 main commits last year, and Governor Thur had over 300 last year. I think like 302, something like that. Another big contribution that the community added this year was that I handed the Ren'Py Discord over to a new lead admin, Elizabeth, and a team of moderators, which takes that off of my plate and lets people who are good at moderating Discords handle that, and lets me focus on the engine and just having fun on the Discord. Other big change we had last year was the fix branch. Fix branch is basically what we've been doing since the 8.1 release, is when something simply fixes a bug, we commit it to the fix branch, which then gets merged into the main branch. And then each night when there's a change, our nightly build process will build a new version of Ren'Py right off the fix release. These tend to be very stable, and if not, they can be fixed very easily within a day or so, which means that if you ever see a bug, we fixed it for you, you can go there, grab the fixed branch, download it, and you have essentially a very good version of Ren'Py that's meant to release your game with. The fixed branch, weirdly, also makes it very easy to make new features, because previously, after a release, I would often have to stop developing for a month because I know as more people see the release, they're going to find issues with it. I'm going to want to fix those, and I don't really want to start the next thing potentially introducing problems with the changes I did when I need to get a stable version out for you. Now we always have that fixed branch. We can always make a stable release. I can jump right in, right after the day after a release, and start working on the next version. So if you ever are looking for the night release, I'll publicize that URL, which I could probably use to publicize a little better. Nightly.renpy.org has those latest. It has both the development version, but also when there's a new one, it has the nightly fixed version that you can just get right off of there. And so that brings us past 2023 to 2024, where there's one release so far of Ren'Py in 2024, although I'm pretty sure that the chat's already spoiled it. Ren'Py 8.2 and Ren'Py 7.7 just came out right during lunch. I posted them up to the website and the various servers and so on. So let's just go over some of the new features that are in here for the rest of the time. Big one is big improvements of text rendering. Due to just the way Unicode is represented in Python, Python 3 versus Python 2, many of these are only in the 8.2 version and not in the 7.7 version. But the big one is we actually integrated a library called HarfBuzz, which is used to shape texts. Shaping is you have a character like that's sort of a theoretical abstract, the letter A. And then what should that look like? Well, that actually matters. That can be very different based on like what accents are nearby it, various other things. So HarfBuzz is the same library that's used in many of your web browsers for converting characters into glyphs. And that's now integrated into Ren'Py. By default in 8.2, we're using it transparently. One of the big things that it added was support for the Brahmic scripts, which are the ones in South Asia. That basically those were ones I thought Ren'Py would never support maybe 10 years ago. Having looked into it the first time, but HarfBuzz actually made it surprisingly to support them. So being able to support those languages now opens a whole, I think it's 1 billion people that might use these languages, and makes it possible for them to create games. It makes it possible to translate games in their languages. So giving us Brahmic scripts lets you do that. I also enabled color emoji support. It's very transparent. If you simply copy a simple emoji into your game, it will switch over to a special emoji font that supports color and will start rendering it. We don't support every emoji font. There's a couple different standards, and we picked the color standard. So the one that we supported with the Twitter emoji font is the one that we include and contains the vast majority, but not some of the latest emojis. If you're using 8.2, we also support emoji sequences. Many of the emoji characters are made up of actually other emojis and a character called the joiner. This is pretty transparent to you because basically you'll generally see it represented as a single character. But for example, woman plus rocket, 0 with joiner together makes a glyph called women astronaut. Go Artemis program. NASA did let me tour VAB, so I should probably say that here. Other thing in text is we have support for variable fonts. These are fonts with multiple axes that like adjust things like the weight or like the size of different things in the fonts. Ren'Py now lets you support that. Moving on, a bunch of more new features and f-string interpolation. We've updated the interpolation in Ren'Py. Actually, Mal did this one to support basically equivalent of Python f-strings. What this means is that instead of just simple variables and things, you can actually have Python expressions. So if you want to call a function now inside your text, you want to do some math inside your text, Ren'Py will support that. The speech bubble system has been updated to have a new retain mode, which works kind of like the NVL mode, but for speech bubbles, where they will stay on the screen. So you can have the same character with multiple lines of dialogue, and you have to explicitly clear them off, similar to the NVL mode. But retain speech bubbles lets you do this. There is a new position type. Previously, Ren'Py could have a position be relative or absolute, but not both. New position type combines those two into one. This is mostly used internally in ATL, but what it lets you do is, for example, have a position that's on, say, like 10 pixels on the left side of the screen and interpolate that to the center of the screen. You sort of could have done that. You could have done slightly more complicated things in Ren'Py, but now it's Ren'Py should, in the vast majority of cases, handle this automatically for you. There's a new HTTP fetch system on desktop. This is a very simple thing. It just makes sure that your application won't like tell you that it's not working while fetching. On the web, though, it's a big improvement because it's now possible to make a Ren'Py web game contact a website. So, like, for example, if you have a quiz that then wants to post its thing to another website, it's possible. There's a bunch of restrictions on what web pages a web page can contact, and Ren'Py doesn't solve those for you. You're still bound by those restrictions. But HTTP fetch gives you that. There is a new Ren'Py updater that's been written from scratch. It's now much easier to actually make a game that can update itself. Still is, a little complicated, but it's possible. There's basic support for Android games over 2 gigabytes that uses the updater. Basically, you make a small game that'll go on Google Play that downloads the real game to the user's device, and then if the real game is there, it will run it. There's a whole lot more in this release. Check the changelog because especially the feature section, because there's a lot of small features that we considered small changes that are going to make somebody's day. Pretty much everything in here was asked for by somebody. One nice one is that Ren'Py will actually remember the position of the launcher and the position of games when you shut them down, so you don't have to constantly move things around your desktop again. Another one is in the launcher, you can tell it to shut off the splash screen, so when you're working on your game, you don't have to see your splash screen a million times. So that's some of the things that are new in Ren'Py 8.2. I apologize for saying this was not going to be an interesting or not going to be something you could use, but hopefully I made up with it by making the new release today. And with that, I'll open the floor for questions. And thank you guys, Liz, for doing this. Thank everybody who makes with Ren'Py for making it thing. Thanks for all the developers, and thanks everybody for being here.
All right. That was great. Everyone loved to talk as usual. It was also half the people on here were not around in the 2000s, and the other half are like, I remember when everything was 640 resolution.
I think Ren'Py started 800 by 600. I think the only thing 640 was that very, very first version that was never released. I mean, by the time I made it up to the actual release, we were like, we're going to demand people go in these 800 by 600 games.
Yep. Yeah, I think 2005 was around 800 was standard.
I think the launcher is 800 by 600 now, I think.
Okay, hold on. Is there any questions here? Would you consider sponsoring one of our competitive VM development jams?
I don't have any money. Like, you're not a company, so like, I mean, what could I give the engine away for free? So
Yeah, you can just donate the engine to it, right? Let's see. Any other questions? This is your chance to go just talk to Python about stuff.
Yeah, I mean, we're not Unity. We're not gonna hey, please give us your money to make a game. But so that makes it tough to sponsor people, even though
someone asked, like, what's your plan for the next version of Ren'Py, if you have any plans for that?
Certainly the sound stuff that we talked about today is certainly high on my list. Especially because it's probably going to be a fairly small thing. So might there's something major coming up that's probably going to be in the next major version. Certainly better integration of 3D is in there. ATL could certainly use some improvements. A bunch of other things that there's a bunch of other things that are in the back of my head, but certainly I think one of the big things is going to be like the ability to filter audio and so on.
Okay, so last question. So someone's not familiar with the terminology. So does so it does not no longer support it, like the Ren'Py 7 stuff. Does it mean that it can still be used, but things might start breaking?
It basically means like the current version of Ren'Py 7 will be the last one that we make. So like you can still use that. I don't recommend it because if I fix a bug, it won't be fixed in Ren'Py 7. If Microsoft upgrades something, it won't work there. So I strongly recommend everybody upgrade to Ren'Py 8 immediately. if you haven't, if you can't get it up to Ren'Py 8, let me know, because I'd like to know what's stopping you. Especially for any games that's going to be released like after this year, you really should be considering upgrading right away. But like, I'm not gonna actively, it's not like I'm gonna take the releases down or anything. It's just like there just won't be any more versions of Ren'Py 7.
Cool. All right. So there's a couple more questions in the chat, but I don't want to eat into Vimi's time. So thank you so much, Vimy.
Yep.
You can get ready.
All right. Share my screen there. There we go. Can everybody see?
Yep.